You chose drama over discipline. The billionaire's voice sliced through the ballroom so sharply that even the violinists near the stage stopped moving their bows for half a second. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above the crowded gala hall, scattering gold light across polished marble floors and $1,000 tuxedos, but suddenly none of the guests were looking at the stage anymore. They were looking at the young black waitress standing near the service entrance with a silver tray still trembling in her hands. Naomi Carter froze under the weight of hundreds of eyes. Her dark curls had slipped loose from beneath her neat serving cap, and one side of her black uniform sleeve was stained with sparkling water from the glass she had dropped moments earlier. Near her feet, an older maintenance worker sat against the wall, breathing slowly now after nearly collapsing beside the kitchen doors. Naomi had been the only one who noticed him clutching his chest while everyone else focused on speeches and champagne towers. She had stepped away from service for less than 60 seconds. 60 seconds was apparently enough to destroy her job. Jonathan Reed descended the stage steps with the cold precision of a man used to controlling rooms larger than this one. At 46, the founder of Reed Global carried the kind of presence that silenced conversations without effort. Tall, silver-haired, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Naomi's monthly rent, he looked at her not with anger but disappointment. Somehow that felt worse. "This company runs on timing," he said calmly, his voice carrying through hidden speakers overhead. "Not emotion." The guests stood frozen around them. A woman near the bar slowly lowered her wine glass. Someone near the orchestra whispered Naomi's name with pity. Jonathan barely noticed any of them. His attention stayed fixed on the waitress who had interrupted the rhythm of his event. Naomi swallowed hard but kept her shoulders straight. "He couldn't breathe," she said quietly. "I just helped him sit down until medical arrived." Jonathan glanced toward the maintenance worker now being assisted by hotel staff. "And while you were helping him," he replied, "my investors waited 10 minutes for service." Naomi opened her mouth slightly, then stopped herself. The room hummed softly with air conditioning and distant city traffic beyond the 30-foot glass windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Somewhere behind the stage, ice clinked into crystal glasses. Jonathan extended his hand. "Your badge." A flicker crossed Naomi's face. Not fear. Hurt. But she reached up anyway, unclipping the small silver name tag from her uniform. Naomi was engraved across the front in simple black lettering. For one strange second, Jonathan noticed her fingers trembling before she placed it into his palm. "Security will finalize payment for tonight," he said. "You're done here." Naomi nodded once. No arguing. No begging. That seemed to unsettle him more than tears would have. She turned quietly toward the employee corridor while whispers spread across the ballroom like smoke. Jonathan exhaled and adjusted his cufflinks, already preparing to return to the stage, but then Naomi suddenly slowed near the massive LED wall displaying Reed Global's livestock ticker. Her eyes narrowed. Rows of glowing numbers reflected faintly across her face. Red symbols flickered for less than a second beneath the scrolling market feed. Strange symbols. Code. Tiny enough that nobody else in the room appeared to notice. Naomi stared at the screen as the ballroom lights shimmered against the glass around her. Then, almost under her breath, she whispered, "That shouldn't be there." Rain hammered against the Chicago sidewalks by the time Naomi Carter reached the subway station 3 blocks from the hotel. Cold wind curled through the underground entrance, tugging at the sleeves of her thin black coat as commuters rushed past her without looking twice. She sat alone on the far end of the platform bench, the silver employee locker key still resting in her palm like something suddenly meaningless. Above the tracks, an old television mounted near the ceiling replayed clips from Jonathan Reed's gala. Financial reporters smiled beneath bright studio lights while words like innovation and expansion crawled across the bottom of the screen. Naomi stared at the flashing stock numbers instead. Her eyes narrowed again. There it was. The same strange sequence she had noticed earlier inside the ballroom. Tiny fragments of code flickering beneath the ticker feed for less than a second at a time. Most people would never catch it. But Naomi had always noticed patterns other people ignored. She leaned forward slowly. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the dark subway window behind the screen. The symbols disappeared again, then reappeared. Different this time. Embedded deeper. Hidden inside the broadcast feed itself. Naomi's stomach tightened. No way, she whispered under her breath. A train thundered past without stopping, sending warm gusts of air across the empty platform. Naomi barely noticed. Her mind was already racing through lines of memory she had spent years trying to bury. Atlanta, Georgia Tech, long nights inside computer labs glowing blue at 2 in the morning. Professors calling her a prodigy before life pulled the floor out from under everything. She could still remember the exact sound her mother's oxygen machine made the day Naomi withdrew from school to work full-time. Since then, rent had mattered more than dreams. Medical bills had mattered more than talent. Survival had mattered more than code. But code still made sense to her in ways people never did. And what she had seen tonight did not belong inside a financial display system. Naomi pulled her old laptop from her backpack the moment she reached her apartment 20 minutes later. The building elevator rattled the entire way to the 7th floor. Inside her tiny studio, the radiator hissed unevenly while city lights blinked through cracked blinds overlooking the wet streets below. Her apartment smelled faintly of coffee and laundry detergent. A framed photo of her and her mother sat beside the kitchen sink. Naomi barely took off her coat before opening the computer. Fingers moving quickly now, she replayed clips from the gala livestream. Pause. Zoom. Frame by frame. The hidden sequence appeared again near the bottom corner of the stock display. This time Naomi caught enough of it to feel her pulse spike. It was not random. It was executable code. Malware. Sophisticated enough to hide inside visual broadcast rendering systems without detection. Whoever planted it knew exactly what they were doing. Naomi's breathing slowed as instinct took over. Her fingers moved across the keyboard faster now, tracing fragments, reconstructing patterns. Then she froze completely. The malware was dormant, waiting, trigger-based, designed to activate later inside Reed Global's internal network. Naomi leaned back slowly in her chair. Outside, sirens echoed somewhere downtown while rain slid down the apartment windows in silver streams. On her laptop screen, the hidden code blinked silently like a warning no one else could hear. Reed Global was about to be attacked. And the only person who noticed was the waitress they threw out less than 2 hours ago. By 6:30 the next morning, downtown Chicago looked washed silver beneath low winter clouds. Naomi Carter stood across the street from Reed Global headquarters with tired eyes and a paper cup of coffee growing cold between her hands. The tower rose 60 stories above her, all glass and steel and reflected sky, the kind of building designed to make ordinary people feel small before they even stepped inside. Commuters hurried through revolving doors while giant digital screens wrapped around the lobby columns displayed smiling advertisements for Reed Global's newest artificial intelligence platform. Naomi barely noticed them. Her attention stayed fixed on the lines of hidden malware code still open on her laptop screen. She had spent the entire night tracing fragments of it through archived event footage and public network architecture. The more she uncovered, the worse it became. Whoever built the program was not trying to steal random files. This was coordinated, designed to move slowly through internal systems before activating all at once. Financial records, investor accounts, security infrastructure. Every major division connected through one synchronized trigger. Reed Global was not being targeted by amateurs. Naomi took a slow breath and crossed the street. Inside the lobby, polished marble reflected the movement of hundreds of employees flowing toward elevators beneath soft piano music. The smell of espresso drifted from a cafe near the entrance. Naomi approached the front security desk carefully, still wearing the same dark coat from last night. The security guard recognized her immediately. His expression tightened. "You cannot be in here," he said before she even reached the counter. Naomi placed her laptop bag down gently. "I just need 5 minutes with somebody from cybersecurity." "Miss Carter, you were terminated last night." "I know." Her voice stayed calm. "But your network is compromised. Somebody embedded malware into the gala broadcast feed." The guard blinked once, then exchanged a quick look with another employee nearby. Naomi opened her laptop fast, pulling up screenshots of the hidden code sequences. "Look right here," she said quietly. "The malware is piggybacking through your media rendering systems. If it spreads into internal access servers..." A sharp laugh interrupted her. "This is unbelievable." Naomi turned. Victor Hale strode across the lobby floor with a leather portfolio tucked beneath one arm, 2 assistants following close behind him. Reed Global's chief operations officer looked perfectly composed in a navy overcoat and polished shoes that clicked sharply against the marble. He stopped several feet away from Naomi and smiled without warmth. The waitress thinks she can save a multi-billion-dollar corporation. A few nearby employees slowed their steps to watch. Naomi ignored the stares. I am serious, she said. There is malicious code inside your display architecture. Somebody already breached your event systems. Victor glanced briefly at her screen before shaking his head with amusement. Do you know how many real cybersecurity experts work for this company? Naomi held his gaze steadily. Not one of them noticed this. For the first time, Victor's smile flickered slightly. Only slightly. Then it returned. Miss Carter, he said smoothly, I suggest you stop embarrassing yourself and leave before security escorts you outside. Naomi's jaw tightened. Around them, elevator doors opened and closed with soft electronic chimes. Snow had started falling lightly beyond the glass. Entrance. You are about to have a major breach, she said quietly. Maybe in hours. Maybe sooner. Victor stepped closer now, lowering his voice. And maybe you are angry about losing your job. Naomi stared at him for a long second. Something about the way he said it unsettled her. Not arrogance. Calm. Too calm. Then every television screen across the lobby flickered at once. The smiling advertisements disappeared for half a second before static flashed violently across every display in the building. Employees froze. Phones immediately began buzzing across the lobby like distant insects. Victor's expression changed instantly. Tiny. Almost invisible. But Naomi saw it. Panic. The static vanished as quickly as it appeared. But the silence left behind felt heavier than noise. Employees across the Reed Global lobby stared upward at the restored screens while phones continued vibrating non-stop in pockets and briefcases. Naomi Carter slowly closed her laptop halfway, her pulse steady now in a way that surprised even her. She had seen this kind of behavior before in simulation labs back in college. Malware testing often started with flickers, tiny disruptions designed to measure system response before the real damage began. Around her, nervous whispers spread through the building like cold air. Victor Hale immediately pulled a phone from his coat pocket and stepped several feet away, his calm expression cracking at the edges for the first time. Get the infrastructure team online right now, he hissed into the receiver. I want diagnostics on every media server immediately. Naomi watched him carefully. He was trying too hard not to look worried. A sharp electronic chime suddenly echoed through the lobby. Then another. Then dozens more. Employees began checking their phones almost simultaneously. Some frowned. Others stopped walking altogether. One man near the elevators muttered under his breath. Why can I not access the investor database? Another employee tapped furiously at her tablet screen. The cloud servers are timing out. Victor turned sharply toward the nearest assistant. Move everyone to backup authentication. His voice stayed controlled, but his jaw had tightened visibly now. Naomi stepped closer before security could stop her. It is spreading through your internal architecture exactly like I warned you, she said quietly. Victor ignored her completely. Shut down non-essential systems, he snapped toward another employee. Now. But the damage was already moving faster than the people inside the building. Across the massive lobby screens, the Reed Global logo suddenly distorted again. This time the image fractured into blocks of digital snow before every display turned black at once. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Then glowing red letters appeared across all 12 lobby screens simultaneously. Network access restricted. Beneath the message, rows of encrypted symbols began scrolling downward like falling rain. Someone near the coffee bar whispered, "Oh my God." Naomi felt the room temperature drop beneath the cold blast of air conditioning overhead. Elevator systems began chiming erratically. Employee keycards stopped responding at security gates. Somewhere higher in the tower, alarms started pulsing faintly through the building. Not fire alarms. System alerts. The kind most executives never heard because technicians usually handled problems before they reached this point. But this was already bigger than technicians. Victor's face had gone pale beneath the polished confidence he normally wore like armor. He spun toward Naomi so suddenly that several nearby employees flinched. "Did you do this?" he demanded. Naomi stared at him in disbelief. What? You showed up this morning predicting an attack. Because I saw the malware last night. Convenient. Naomi's eyes hardened. You think I hacked a company from my apartment after serving appetizers yesterday? Before Victor could answer, the private elevator at the far end of the lobby opened with a soft metallic hum. Jonathan Reed stepped out flanked by two senior executives, his expression already dark with irritation. He moved quickly across the marble floor. Silver tie slightly loosened, phone pressed tightly against one ear. I do not care how much it costs, he said coldly into the receiver. Get the servers back online before the market opens in 20 minutes. Then he stopped. His eyes landed on Naomi standing near the security desk. For one brief second, confusion crossed his face. Then annoyance returned immediately. Why is she here? Naomi opened her mouth to speak, but Victor answered first. She claims she predicted the breach. Jonathan's eyes narrowed sharply toward her. Around them, another wave of alarms pulsed through the tower as the giant lobby screens flickered blood red. The executive conference room on the 58th floor felt colder than the streets outside. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Chicago where traffic crawled beneath falling snow and giant electronic billboards flickered with breaking financial news about Reed Global's sudden network failure. Inside the room, tension pressed against the walls harder than the winter wind outside. Naomi Carter sat at the far end of the polished black conference table with her old laptop open beside a glass of untouched water. Across from her, half a dozen executives argued in overlapping voices while stock values continued dropping across the muted television screens mounted overhead. Jonathan Reed stood near the windows with one hand against his jaw, listening to simultaneous updates through an earpiece while trying not to show how rapidly control was slipping away. Every few seconds another employee entered the room carrying tablets filled with worse news than the last. Investor access frozen. Internal communications failing. Trading systems delayed. By the time the opening bell rang on Wall Street, Reed Global stock had already dropped 9%. Naomi watched quietly while panic moved through the room in expensive suits and polished shoes. Nobody looked powerful anymore. Victor Hale paced beside the table, his frustration growing sharper by the minute. Our internal cybersecurity division has already isolated the breach, he insisted. We do not need outside interference. Naomi finally looked up from her screen. You have not isolated anything. Victor stopped walking. Excuse me. Naomi rotated her laptop toward the room. Lines of encrypted traffic scrolled rapidly across the screen like streams of light. The malware is still moving through your internal architecture. Whoever built it designed multiple dormant pathways. Every time your team closes one route, another opens. One of the executives leaned forward slowly. How can you even tell? Naomi answered without arrogance. Because this attack was designed by somebody who understands your company structure intimately. Jonathan turned away from the windows then. His eyes locked onto Naomi carefully now, not dismissing her this time. Studying her. You are saying this came from inside Reed Global? Naomi nodded once. Nobody external could map your media systems, investor channels, executive permissions, and backup architecture this precisely without internal access. Silence settled heavily across the room. Even Victor stopped speaking for a moment. Snow drifted softly beyond the glass walls while the city below kept moving, as if nothing extraordinary was happening inside this tower. Jonathan stepped toward the conference table slowly. If you are right, he said carefully, then why target the gala first? Naomi's fingers tapped lightly against the keyboard. Because it gave them access to live broadcast rendering systems connected to executive authentication servers. The gala was not the target. Her eyes lifted toward him. It was the doorway. Another alarm suddenly pulsed across the conference room monitors. Several executives gasped quietly as screens switched automatically to emergency financial reports. Reed Global stock had dropped another 4% in less than 6 minutes. Jonathan stared at the numbers without blinking. Millions disappearing in real time. His jaw tightened visibly. Victor immediately stepped forward. Jonathan, we need to suspend external access entirely and contact federal cyber response teams. Naomi shook her head before Jonathan could answer. If you shut everything down right now, the malware triggers automatically. The room froze again. Victor stared at her sharply. How would you know that? Naomi met his gaze calmly. Because whoever built this expected panic. Something unreadable flickered across Victor's face again. Too quick for most people to notice. But Jonathan noticed this one. Naomi saw it happen. For the first time since entering the room, Jonathan Reed looked away from her and directly at his oldest business partner with visible uncertainty. Then the lights flickered once, twice, and every screen in the conference room suddenly switched to a single sentence glowing red against black. You should have listened to her. Nobody in the conference room spoke for nearly 5 full seconds after the message appeared across the screens. The glowing red letters reflected faintly against the glass walls and polished black table, while the low hum of failing servers echoed through hidden speakers overhead. Jonathan Reed stared at the sentence as though the building itself had accused him personally. You should have listened to her. Naomi Carter slowly closed her laptop halfway and looked toward the executives surrounding the table. Some avoided eye contact entirely now. Others looked openly shaken. Victor Hale recovered first. He stepped toward the nearest monitor and jabbed a finger toward the screen. This proves nothing except that the attacker is manipulating optics, he snapped. They are trying to create distrust inside the company. Naomi watched him carefully again. The rhythm of his reactions felt wrong. Too immediate. Too defensive. Most executives panicked outwardly when losing control. Victor kept trying to direct the panic instead. Jonathan finally turned from the screens. Can you stop this attack or not? He asked Naomi quietly. Every voice in the room disappeared. Naomi held his gaze for a long moment before answering honestly. Maybe. But not from here. Jonathan frowned slightly. What does that mean? Naomi reached for her laptop again and opened a series of network diagrams across the display. The malware is rerouting through mirrored authentication layers. Whoever built it created hidden permissions buried inside executive-level access. She zoomed into several blinking nodes connected deep within the company architecture. There is a secondary control point somewhere inside this building. Victor folded his arms tightly. Our infrastructure maps show no unauthorized server locations. Naomi did not even look at him this time. That is because whoever built it had permission to hide it. The words landed heavily across the room. Snow continued drifting outside the towering windows while distant thunder rolled faintly above the city skyline. Jonathan stepped closer to Naomi's screen now, studying the diagrams himself. You are saying one of my executives built this? Naomi hesitated carefully. I am saying this attack understands your executive hierarchy too well to come from outside. Another silence followed. Jonathan's expression hardened slightly as years of business instinct began battling against loyalty. Reed Global had not been built by strangers. Most of his senior leadership had been with him for decades. Victor especially. They had started the company together in a cramped office 20 years earlier with folding tables and borrowed computers. Jonathan trusted him almost like family. But trust looked different when millions of dollars disappeared every minute. Naomi's fingers moved across the keyboard again. Suddenly a hidden access trail illuminated across the screen in glowing blue lines. One pathway pulsed brighter than the others. Executive Override Channel. Naomi's eyes narrowed immediately. There, she whispered. Victor stepped forward too quickly. That is impossible. Naomi looked up sharply. You recognized it fast for something impossible. Victor's face tightened. Just slightly. Jonathan noticed. Again, the room temperature suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. Where does that channel lead? Jonathan asked quietly. Naomi traced the route deeper through the encrypted architecture. Her breathing slowed as the final destination loaded across the screen. Then she froze completely. So did Jonathan. The override channel terminated inside a private executive server suite, located on the 59th floor. Access restricted to only 3 people in the entire corporation. Jonathan Reed, Victor Hale, and Emily Brooks, the company's chief legal officer. Victor immediately shook his head. This is planted evidence. But Naomi was no longer looking at him. She was staring at a timestamp blinking beside the hidden access logs. Last authorized entry, 11:37 last night. During the gala. Right after Jonathan fired her. Naomi slowly lifted her eyes toward Victor. You knew the attack had already started, she said softly. The overhead lights flickered once more. And for the first time all morning, Victor Hale looked genuinely afraid. The storm outside had grown heavier by noon, snow and freezing rain streaking across the glass walls of Reed Global headquarters, while emergency alerts continued flashing through the building like silent lightning. Inside the conference room, nobody moved after Naomi Carter spoke Victor Hale's name aloud. The air itself seemed to tighten. Jonathan Reed stood completely still near the end of the conference table, his eyes fixed on the access logs glowing across Naomi's laptop screen. 11:37 last night. During the gala, the exact moment Naomi had been escorted out of the ballroom. Victor let out a short laugh that sounded forced even to himself. This is insane, he said sharply. You are trusting a former waitress over your own executive team? Naomi did not react to the insult this time. Her focus remained on the hidden pathways still moving across the screen. The malware is escalating, she said quietly. If the final trigger activates, your investor archives and internal financial records will corrupt permanently. Several executives exchanged frightened looks. Jonathan finally stepped away from the windows. Victor, he said slowly, why did you access the executive override server during the gala? Victor's jaw tightened instantly. I told you already. I was monitoring the event infrastructure. Naomi shook her head once. No. You were bypassing security authentication. Victor turned toward her with visible frustration now. You do not even belong in this room. And yet I am the only person explaining what is happening. The words landed harder than Naomi intended. Jonathan noticed that too. For the first time all morning, he looked at her not as an employee, not as a problem, but as someone carrying the weight of the entire room while everyone else panicked around her. Victor stepped toward Jonathan quickly. She is manipulating incomplete data to save herself. Naomi lifted her eyes calmly. Then let us verify it. She typed several commands rapidly before rotating the laptop again. Hidden server logs expanded across the screen, exposing encrypted file transfers routed through executive credentials over the past 3 weeks. Most of the room could not understand the technical details. Jonathan could. Enough anyway. Enough to recognize confidential internal reports moving somewhere they should never have gone. Victor's face slowly lost color. One executive near the far end of the table whispered, "Those are acquisition files." Naomi nodded slightly. And they were copied externally through mirrored channels hidden inside your broadcast systems. Jonathan stared at the timestamps in disbelief. Why? He asked quietly. Victor looked away first. That answer alone felt louder than shouting. Naomi's voice softened unexpectedly. Because somebody wanted Reed Global weakened before the merger vote next month. The room fell silent again. Jonathan's breathing slowed visibly as realization spread across his face piece by piece. 20 years building the company. 20 years trusting the man standing beside him. Outside the windows, thunder rolled low above the skyline. Victor finally spoke again, but the confidence was gone now. Jonathan, listen to me carefully. This company was already slipping. The board wanted change. Investors wanted faster returns. I did what was necessary to protect my position before they pushed me out. Several executives stared at him in stunned silence. Jonathan looked physically older all at once. You sold us out? Victor shook his head immediately. No. I created leverage. Naomi closed her laptop slowly and nearly destroyed thousands of innocent employees in the process. Victor laughed bitterly under his breath. You think companies survive on kindness? Jonathan's eyes lifted sharply then. Something changed inside them. Not anger. Disappointment. The kind that cuts deeper because it comes from someone once trusted completely. Then he looked toward Naomi standing quietly beside the conference table in the same dark coat she had arrived in hours earlier. The woman he fired for. Stopping to help another human being. Jonathan's voice dropped low. After everything I did to you this morning, he said carefully, why are you still helping us? Naomi met his eyes without hesitation. Because the people working in this building did not deserve to pay for his choices. And in the silence that followed, Jonathan Reed finally understood which person in the room actually belonged at the head of the company. By early afternoon, The storm over Chicago had turned the city skyline into a blur of silver rain and flashing emergency lights. Inside Reed Global headquarters, the atmosphere had shifted completely. The polished confidence that usually filled the executive floors was gone, replaced by tension so thick it seemed to hum through the walls themselves. Employees crowded around darkened computer stations while emergency technicians rushed through hallways carrying tablets and backup drives. But deep inside the executive conference room, Naomi Carter sat alone at the center of controlled chaos, her fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard as lines of encrypted code reflected across her face. The giant digital clock mounted above the room entrance read 1:42 p.m. Reed Global stock had dropped nearly 18% since morning. Investors were panicking. Financial news networks had already begun speculating about bankruptcy risks and executive corruption. Jonathan Reed stood behind Naomi's chair now instead of at the far end of the room. He had not checked his phone in almost 10 minutes, which for him was nearly unheard of. His focus remained entirely on the young woman he dismissed less than 24 hours earlier. Around them, executives watched silently as Naomi rerouted sections of the infected network one layer at a time. "The malware is tied to the live investor stream," she explained calmly. "If I isolate the server too aggressively, it triggers the final corruption sequence." Emily Brooks leaned closer. "Can you stop it without shutting the company down?" Naomi exhaled slowly. "Only if I expose the source publicly first." Jonathan frowned slightly. "Publicly?" Naomi nodded once. "The malware was designed around secrecy and delayed panic. Whoever built it expected the company to hide the breach long enough for the financial damage to spread." Her eyes lifted toward the television screens displaying non-stop market coverage. "The only way to break the sequence is transparency." Silence followed. 4 years Reed Global had protected its image with absolute control. Scandals were buried quietly. Problems handled internally. Jonathan built his empire on precision and discipline. Public weakness had never been an option. But today his company was bleeding in real time, while the woman he underestimated remained the only calm person in the building. Jonathan looked toward the storm outside the windows for a long moment before speaking quietly. "Do it." Naomi nodded once and reopened the live executive media feed, connected to every investor platform still functioning. Within seconds, emergency live stream windows appeared across business networks nationwide. Financial reporters immediately switched coverage to Reed Global headquarters. Across America, investors watched as the conference room camera activated. Naomi remained seated at the center of the frame while executives shifted nervously behind her. Jonathan stepped forward slowly into view beside her. His face looked exhausted now, human. For the first time in years, he was not performing confidence for shareholders. He was telling the truth. "This morning," he began carefully, "Reed Global suffered a coordinated internal cyberattack tied to executive-level corruption." Gasps erupted from reporters visible through the live stream monitors. Naomi quietly brought up the encrypted server logs across the public display. Transfer records, hidden access pathways, executive override entries linked directly to Victor Hale's credentials. Every piece of evidence appeared one after another with brutal clarity. Somewhere downstairs, federal investigators were already entering the building. Jonathan's voice lowered slightly. "I failed to recognize the person who warned us first." Naomi looked down briefly at her keyboard. Jonathan continued anyway. "While the rest of us protected appearances, she protected people." The room stayed completely silent after that. Naomi finished the final command sequence and pressed enter. Across the conference room screens, the red warning symbols disappeared one by one. System pathways stabilized. Investor servers reconnected. Trading platforms slowly returned online. A soft wave of relieved breathing moved through the room like people surfacing after being underwater too long. Outside the windows, the storm finally began to clear. Pale sunlight pushed through the clouds for the first time all day, reflecting softly against the glass towers across downtown Chicago. Naomi leaned back slowly in her chair, exhausted now that the adrenaline was fading. Jonathan looked at her carefully before speaking again, quieter this time. "I fired the only person in this company who actually stopped to save someone. Twice." 3 months later, the first snow of December drifted softly across downtown Chicago, dusting the sidewalks and rooftops in pale white, while the city moved with the slower rhythm that always came before Christmas. Inside Reed Global headquarters, the atmosphere felt completely different from the chaos that once swallowed the building. Employees laughed again in elevator corridors. Television screens displayed stable markets instead of emergency alerts. Even the lighting throughout the executive floors seemed warmer somehow. Near the top of the tower, sunlight spilled through the massive windows of a newly renovated cybersecurity command center overlooking Lake Michigan. Naomi Carter stood quietly beside a wall of digital monitors, reviewing live security diagnostics while soft jazz played somewhere from a nearby office speaker. Her dark curls were tied neatly back now, and instead of a catering uniform, she wore a navy blazer with a silver identification badge clipped near the collar. Chief Security Director. The title still felt unreal some mornings. Around her, teams of analysts monitored encrypted systems Naomi herself had redesigned from the ground up after the breach. Stronger firewalls. Transparent reporting structures. No hidden executive overrides. No silent backdoors. Reed Global stock had fully recovered within 6 weeks after the company publicly exposed the corruption instead of hiding it. Financial reporters called it one of the most surprising corporate recoveries in years. But inside the building, employees talked less about stock prices and more about the young woman who stayed to save a company that once threw her away. Naomi glanced toward the office windows as snow drifted across the skyline outside. Her phone buzzed softly against the desk. A text from her mother appeared on the screen. "Proud of you, baby." Naomi smiled faintly and placed the phone back down beside an old silver name tag resting near her keyboard. The same one Jonathan Reed had asked her to surrender the night he fired her. The black engraved letters were slightly scratched now. Naomi. Waitress. She kept it beside her monitor every day. Not because she missed that job. Because she never wanted to forget the version of herself who still stopped to help people when nobody important was watching. A soft knock sounded against the open office door. Jonathan Reed stepped inside carrying 2 cups of coffee. He looked different too lately. Not weaker. Just quieter. Less polished around the edges. More human. He held out one of the cups toward Naomi. "Still working through lunch?" Naomi accepted it with a small smile. "Somebody has to make sure your company survives." Jonathan let out a low laugh beneath his breath. "Fair point." He walked slowly around the office, studying the glowing security displays before his attention finally settled on the old name tag resting beside her keyboard. For a long moment he said nothing at all. Snow continued falling softly outside while distant city lights reflected across the glass walls around them. Jonathan picked up the name tag carefully between his fingers. "You kept this." Naomi nodded once. "It reminds me who I was before all this." Jonathan looked down at the scratched silver surface for several seconds. Then he spoke quietly. "No," he said. "It reminds you who you still are." Naomi looked at him in silence. Jonathan placed the name tag back beside the keyboard with unusual care. Months earlier he would have measured people by efficiency, performance, and profit margins. But the woman standing in front of him had changed something deeper than company policy. She forced him to see value where he once only saw inconvenience. Humanity where he once only measured productivity. Outside the windows, snowflakes drifted slowly against the Chicago skyline, while warm golden light filled the office. Naomi returned her attention to the glowing security monitors, calm and steady beneath their reflection. And beside her keyboard, the small silver name tag remained exactly where it belonged.